Do you know what faith is? Hopefully you do. I mean, if you've been following us in this series of Romans, hopefully you understand what faith is, or at least what I say it is anyway. And if someone came up to you and asked you, what is faith? Could you explain it to them? Before we look at what it is, before I remind you what it is, let me explain what it's not. Let me try to dispel some myths. Because I think there's some confusion in this area. Faith is not, some say, we live by faith every day. You turn on your faucet and you fill a glass of water and that's faith. You don't know what's in there. You don't know what's in those pipes. That's faith. Or you open a can of food and you eat it and that's faith because you don't know who put what in that thing and you're eating it. Or you fly in an airplane and that's faith. That is faith almost. Those things are not faith. That is simply putting into practice what we call the law of mathematical probability. I've seen a lot of people do it. They're okay. I do. I don't even think about it. I've grown up seeing people drink out of the faucet. That's not faith. It's just what everybody does. Don't even think about it. And also, faith is not superstition. But I think a lot of people have made it that in our culture. It's not a sort of sixth sense, some intuition into the spiritual realm, or an open sesame sort of thing. It's not wishful thinking. I want a certain thing to happen, so I'm having faith that it will. That's just wishful thinking. Many people are like the girl who was asked to define faith, and she said, faith is believing what you know isn't so. That's not faith. But that's what faith is, I think, to many people. They think it's some sort of gamble-like. Faith is always intelligent. It always knows what it's doing. Biblically defined, faith is understanding and assent to a proposition. And we've gone over this. If you ask me, where's my money? And I say to you, the check's in the mail, you're either going to believe it or not. And the reason we believe it or not is kind of dependent on the object. If I say the check's in the mail, it depends on what you think of me. If you think I'm an honest person and you think I'm telling the truth, then you say, yeah, I believe that. The check's probably in the mail. No matter what the subject, and this is important for us to understand, whether it's God or guns, the psychology or linguistic of belief is identical in all cases. How many of you know what an M61 Vulcan is? It's a gun, okay. Can you give me a little more definition than that? All right, you're going to learn something then today, all right? See, nothing else, I know you're going to learn something. You're going to learn what an M61 Vulcan is. It is a hydraulically driven, 6-barreled, air-cooled, electrically fired Gatling cannon. Fires 20 millimeter rounds. It fires 20 millimeter rounds at the rate of 6,000 rounds per minute. That is 100 rounds per second. 20 millimeter rounds, 100 per second. Do you believe that? No. Okay, so that's not faith. But if you do believe me, that would be faith. Look it up, okay? Do some research. M61 Vulcan. The military uses this gun. It's on several planes. I believe it's on the A-10 Warthog, the tank killer. You're firing 20 millimeter rounds at 100 per second? That's a lot of rounds. Huh? 20 millimeter round is good size, okay? It's probably about that big around. The projectile looks like that. It does serious damage, okay? I saw them fire a M1 Vulcan. They had 40 rounds in it, and they were test firing it with just 40 rounds, and the guy pushed the button and went, and it was empty. Just all the shell casings come flying out of there, all right? But if you believe that it fires 100 rounds per second, then you're believing what I'm telling you. You're trusting in what I've said. My point is, believing is always thinking a proposition is true. That's my proposition. M61 Vulcan fires 100 rounds per second. The difference between various beliefs lies in the objects or the propositions believed, not in the nature of belief. See, faith must begin with knowledge. You can't believe what you don't know. Now, the Catholics say you can. The Catholics have something called implicit faith. It means you believe it if you don't even know it. I'm not sure how that works out. Belief is the act of assenting to something you understand. Now, we all understand a lot of things that we don't believe. I understand evolution. I do not believe it. I understand it completely. I understand what they say happens, and I just think it's not true. Now, have you ever heard of Soren Kierkegaard? He was a Dutch theologian of the mid-19th century, and he is really the father of this subjective movement that most of the church has been swept away by. Kierkegaard taught this: it really makes no difference what you believe. The how is all that matters. If you are really passionate, if you really have a zeal, that's all that's important. What you believe really doesn't make any difference. Can you think of a verse that counters that right off the top of your head? No, we haven't got there yet, but in Romans 10, verse 1, Paul says, I pray for Israel, and he says in verse 2, they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. And see, to him it just was all about zeal. And we see this philosophy of Kierkegaard's everywhere in the church today. It's called mindless passion. You know, you're all excited, and many churches today, you go in there and it's like a cheerleading session. The idea is to get you so wound up. You just think, man, we had a great service. What'd you learn? I didn't learn anything, but man, it felt good. You know? Well, Kierkegaard used the illustration to illustrate his belief of an Orthodox Lutheran and a Hindu. And the Orthodox Lutheran prayed to God, but he had no passion. He just prayed according to knowledge. Well, Kierkegaard says that is useless to God. But he says if you take a Hindu praying before an idol, if he prayed with passion, he would in fact be praying to the true God, even though he had no knowledge of God. So Kierkegaard's buzz phrase was infinite passion. He said we encounter God by zeal. And we see this today in our culture, in a lot of churches. His teaching has literally infected the modern church. People just think, yeah, it's all about, your zeal, your excitement, your enthusiasm. And knowledge is almost, looked down upon. I want to give you a deep theological thought that you need to grasp. Got a pen, you need to write this down. This is really heavy. When it comes to faith, there are not different hows. There are only different whats. It's what you believe that matters. You can't believe the wrong way. You can only believe the wrong thing. See, faith is understanding and assent to a proposition. It's believing a proposition. In this case, it's a promise in Romans 4:20. Yet with respect to the promise of God, God gave Abraham a promise. The proposition was this: so shall your descendants be. And Abraham said, amen. I think we see the same definition of faith, believing in a proposition. If you look at Acts 27:25, the context here is Paul is on the ship heading to Rome. The thing Paul tells him at the beginning of the voyage, I recommend you don't do this. There's going to be great loss of life into the ship. Well, then God comes to Paul and says, look, be encouraged, no one's going to die. Just help them stay on the ship. Everybody, you're going to lose everything, but people will not die. And so Paul gets up and says, therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God. What do you believe? That it will turn out exactly as I've been told. He told me something and I believe what he said. I believe the proposition no one's going to die. He believed it. That is faith.